All right, welcome to the Emergency Goalies again. And only two games this week. It was a relatively light week for the Blackhawks. The first game was Saturday night in Montreal against the Canadiens, and as has been the case pretty much the whole time he's been on the Blackhawks, Corey Crawford plays very, very well in Montreal. That's his hometown, and he plays great. And he played great again Saturday. There are only two goals in this game. Uh, Murphy's got the first goal. Not a guy you usually associate with scoring goals, but a great pass from DeBrincat to Murphy, and he fired it home to make it 1-0. Then, of course, Brandon Perlini, who, again, just stayed red hot, scored the second goal to make it a 2-0 lead. And after that, Montreal shot a lot of shots. I would say, I think it was 48 was the final number. I'm not exactly, but they fired a lot of rubber at Corey Crawford, and he stopped it all and got the shutout, 2-0. Now, the next game was on Monday night, and first of all, I skipped this game in the preview. I went right from Montreal to the Philadelphia game, which is tomorrow. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so I kind of skipped right over the Vancouver game, which was Monday night in Chicago. And it seemed like at first the Blackhawks might have skipped over this game too, because they did not start out in this game very good. It was all Vancouver for the first about 10 minutes of the game. But then the Blackhawks scored on the power play, tipped by Jonathan Taves on a point shot to give them a 1-0 lead. But the Canucks picked it right back up again in the second period, and they were all over the Blackhawks. They scored two quick goals to go up 2-1, and Crawford really played well. I mean, this game could have been 6-1 with all the chances that the Canucks got, but it remained 2-1 until late in the third period. Things were starting to look pretty like the Blackhawks, if they lost this game, because they had a chance to get within 3 points of the playoffs, but if they dropped this game to a team behind them in the standings, it would not be good. But the Blackhawks were able to tie the game with about 3 minutes left. Point shot from Gustafsson that I think it deflected in off a Canuck, but somehow it bounced off somebody and made it into the net. And the Blackhawks tied the game at 2. The game went to overtime, and reminiscent of the early Blackhawk overtime games this year, the Canucks went right down the ice and scored about 10 seconds into overtime. So it was a 3-2 loss, but they did get a point to move within 4 points of the Coyotes for the last playoff spot. The Wild, they're 3 behind the Wild, and I think 3 behind the Avalanche too, because they beat the Wild last
2.
night. Okay, 2. So
very compressed in the standings.
Yes, it is, but it was 3 out of 4 possible points this week, and that's what you're looking for. You want to at least get 75%. So the Blackhawks stay alive. They're still on the outside. Their chances are not great, but they're still alive. So what do you think of these mini 2-game stretch we saw?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It was really a showcase for Crawford. Obviously, the Montreal game, you touched on how well he traditionally has played there, and this game was no different. He was sensational in that game, obviously posting a shutout, his second of the year. It was just, Montreal did end up getting a decent amount of shots, but I actually felt like the Blackhawks played a fairly solid defensive game. I think a lot of the shots that Montreal did generate were not of very high quality. So I think the Hawks did a pretty good job of keeping plays to the perimeter and limiting the high scoring or the high danger chances. So even though Crawford did play exceptionally well in the game, I do think the rest of the team deserves a little bit of credit for it as well. That was less the case in the Vancouver game. That was the forwards and the defensemen did not give Crawford much of an effort at the first half of the game, maybe even the first full 2 periods of the game. Blackhawks certainly seemed like they were sleepwalking a little bit, didn't quite have the same jump in their step, the same commitment that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And it showed. Vancouver was generating a lot of not just puck possession, but generating good scoring chances off of that puck possession, and a couple of breakaways and odd man rushes. And Crawford had to stand strong and did so, kept the team in the game, and, kept them within 1 goal. And eventually Gustafsson was able to, to pot that, that tying goal. And, Crawford stole a point in that game. So that was, encouraging to see. It wasn't very long ago we were talking about if the Blackhawks were going to get back into it, a lot was going to rest on Crawford's shoulders. And at the time, I thought it was, that was a pretty tall ask of Crawford, considering the amount of time that he had missed, and whether endurance would be an issue, rust would be an issue. But at least over the last 3 or 4 games, he's really come on and kind of looks like the Crawford of old, and it's made a big difference for the Hawks. So
Yeah, and there's a theme too that I think we talked about a little bit on this podcast now, but I want to stretch it out a little bit just for this. That, I mean, poor Dylan Sakura. He's been playing.
geez.
He's been playing great, and it's like
Yeah.
he just can't get that first goal to go in. But he's really been good.
Yeah, he's been much more noticeable over the last, I'd almost say month. It might not be quite that long, but he's carrying the puck more. He's not losing it as quickly. There are still instances where his lack of physical strength works against him and he is knocked off the puck, or some of those really high quality scoring chances he's getting bumped as those shots are taking place. And I think it's just knocking him off a little bit more than it would, a typical player with a little more size and strength. So I do think there's still a little bit more adjustment time that he needs, but he's definitely made strides. I mean, he is flying around the ice. He's being much more noticeable, not just in the offensive zone, but in the neutral and defensive zone. He's probably never going to be really, responsible defender, but he's at least putting in effort and he's moving his feet and he is being aggressive and looking to break up some plays. And I think it's made a big difference for him, just in terms of, I think it gets the puck on his stick a little bit more in both the defensive and neutral zone. So kind of that transition game that's helping propel him into the offensive zone a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the goals aren't going in, but he's generating offense. He's generating chances for other players, and those players are also generating chances for him. So I do think it's just a matter of time. He's absolutely snake bitten at this point, but if he continues to play the way he has been, I have no concern over it. I mean, he looks like a viable top 9 forward over the last few weeks. So I'm happy with the progress he's making.
Yeah, and we were kind of touching on this, before with the production from Perlini and other people, but it's clear now that Kane is in a bit of a slump. And
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of like, as we were saying, it's almost unsustainable what he was doing before. So it's not that much of a shock, but it's one of those things that you'd like to get Kane or DeBrincat going again for this final little stretch run, but at least they're in position.
I do think they made a good decision in the last game where they flip-flopped Saad and Kane. While the initial jolt of the line jumble, what was that, 3 or 4 games ago, and putting Kane back with Anisimov, uh, I think it helped a little bit, but I think over the course of the last few games, if you're playing Kane on that line, Patrick Kane is not getting on the ice nearly as much, and when he is on the ice, he's not playing with quite as good of playmakers, and I think it was starting to show a little bit. I mean, Taves and Strome are going to get more ice time than Anisimov with the way the pecking order is right now. So the spreading out of the big guns over the 3 lines can sometimes work out, but I think it was starting to work against the Hawks a little bit there, and I was happy to see Colleton kind of abandon it in the third period against Vancouver, and I hope he sticks with that. They switched up that line so that Kane was playing with Taves and Sakura, and I wouldn't mind seeing them stick with that, and then having Saad and Cahoon down with Anisimov, and I've kind of made my thoughts known on preferring Saad on that third line role where he can be more the focal point anyway. So I hope he sticks with that the configuration from the third period in Vancouver. I'm very curious to see how it plays out in Philadelphia.
You almost wonder, they had a stat on during the Vancouver game about how he'd been playing, averaging like 23 minutes a game, Kane, until recently. And then when he moved to the Anisimov line, he was throttled back. And you almost wonder if he was was Colleton trying to rest him a little bit more and then for this final stretch? I don't know. Is that me thinking too conspiratorially or?
I think there was a combination of things with it. Him playing on the third line probably accounted for maybe a minute or two of that difference. But a lot of it was over the last. I mean, we're on a 4-5 game point streak here, where the Blackhawks have been playing from ahead most of the time. And so you're not seeing the need to double shift Kane on the fourth line in an effort to catch back up. And when they're losing and they're playing from behind, he's getting an extra minute or two per game in those situations. And we've also not seen the power play out there nearly as much. The Blackhawks just haven't been drawing as many penalties. So, Kane usually plays at least the first minute and 15 seconds, and sometimes he's out there for the full 2 minutes if nobody scores. So I think that's most of the reason for, the 4 or 5 minute difference in his playing time of late, rather than just the third line stuff. But at this point, you can't afford to not have Patrick Kane out there on your top 2 lines. You can't do it with crunch time now.
Yeah, and another thing, if people followed me on Twitter, they probably saw this during the Vancouver game, but I think they kind of went up. The fourth line was been playing better, but they kind of overexposed them in the game on Monday, and it kind of showed. And I just think maybe were they getting a little too confident in the fourth line? But when the 2 goals, they were out there, and they weren't playing as good as they had been.
Yeah, I think there might have been a little bit of that. Certainly the 1 goal, I was very unhappy with Chris Kunitz's effort on it. He was standing right next to the guy who scored on a rebound, and Kunitz didn't even get a stick on him or anything. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it was kind of a mistake to rely so much on the fourth line over the last week because the schedule was so light. In one way you can look at it is hopefully it gives them a little bit of confidence in that line going forward. But you look over the last 2 weeks of the season coming up here, and there's no more 2 days off. The longest stretch of days off they have is 1. It's every other day and occasionally back to back. There's no more rest, so you're gonna need all four lines rolling on a fairly consistent basis if you hope to be able to maintain, um, a high level of play for the team over these last couple of weeks. It's going to be imperative it's going to be imperative for that line to contribute. And if it does falter the way it did in Vancouver, um, it's going to likely sink any hopes that the Blackhawks have, because they can't just roll with three lines for these final, what is it, like 9 games in like 17 days or something like that. So it's going to be a lot tougher going forward.
Yeah. So you've got. I'm trying to think, like, because there are only 2 games. Like, what else to? Obviously, Crawford was the big story. The defense,
I think we're seeing a little bit of improvement. We kind of talked last week. Gustafson seems to be playing a little bit more responsibly in the defensive zone, and I think he's continued to do that. He still surprises every once in a while with some physical play. He'll rub guys off of the puck, and I think he's being much more responsible with his gap and not giving the opposing players so much space, and just trusting his ability to defend. And I do think it is making a difference, and I think that can be a big boost for this team heading into next season if he continues to play well over the last couple of weeks of the season. And they could potentially have some confidence in him as a top 4 defender heading into next year. So.
Yeah, and Cuckoo played a little bit too, and looked okay. We haven't seen these like massive letdowns that we saw earlier in the year, because there were games early in the year where it was just like a fire drill back there, and you'd see people wide open. And now stuff like that still occasionally happens, but it seems like it's a lot less of like, it's not as blatantly bad play.
Yeah, they're definitely tightening up a little bit in the defensive zone, which is a very good sign. I do see Forsling continue to have probably the most frequent gaffes, but he's also been making a few pretty nice plays over the last couple of weeks. And of course, we got to remember he's 3 or 4 years younger than Dahlstrom and Cuckoo. So, you wouldn't expect him to be quite as polished as those guys. And I mean, then he's like 5 years younger than Gustafson, I think. So, I think sometimes we unfairly judge Forsling as if he's in the same boat as those 3 guys. Whereas I think in reality, he's obviously a little bit further behind those guys and probably has a little more ups. Well, I shouldn't say probably. He definitely has more upside than Cuckoo and Dahlstrom.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. There's like, because he's making some nice plays on the offensive end too. But yeah, there is a moment like, I think it was the Vancouver game when he went back on the puck and like didn't know which way to turn with the puck, and like went left and went right and kind of got stuck, and you're like,
just kind of ate it into the boards, and didn't make a play. There's still times where his brain just cramps up, and you have plays like that, or he just makes an egregious turnover. So yeah, there's definitely still a learning curve with him at this point, but I have like you said, I've been encouraged with some of his play in the neutral zone and the offensive end. And he does still surprise on occasion, making a nice outlet pass from the defensive zone, or skating away from danger. So yeah, I mean, I'm still hopeful for Forsling long term, but I would definitely say of their 7 defensemen right now, do or die here over the next couple of weeks, I would not be relying on him in a significant role at all. I would feel a little more confident going with Cuckoo in these games, but we'll see how it plays out. They've been pretty consistent with rotating those guys in. Nobody seems to play more than 3 or 4 games in a row before they rotate them out. So we'll see if that continues.
Well, I guess I would normally find some more, but we're in this playoff drive, so I think we should just get to the preview because we can talk a little bit more about all these games because there's some big games coming up.
Big games coming up. The first one is not so much a big game. Well, I mean, as much as any of the games from here on out aren't big. Eastern Conference game. It's at home, so you would definitely like to get at least 1 point out of it. And it's against the Flyers tomorrow night. The Flyers are kind of a mirror of the Hawks over in the Eastern Conference. They are a high-scoring team that doesn't defend very well. The Flyers have more goaltending issues than the Blackhawks do. But, they got guys like Giroux and Couturier who score at a pretty high rate. And, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to be a run and gun game. But, hopefully that gives the Hawks the advantage playing both at home and, assuming Crawford starts, to have the advantage in the goaltending in that game. So it would give the Hawks a big advantage if they can get 2 points out of that heading into the weekend. And the weekend is, it's going to be a huge test for the Hawks. It's home and home with the Colorado Avalanche. The first game's on the road Saturday afternoon. So, it obviously with the back-to-back, Crawford's probably only going to start one of them. I shouldn't say probably. It's almost assuredly Crawford's only going to start one of them. So I'm curious to see how they do that, whether it's the first game to try and, steal out those points and give yourself a little bit of a cushion heading into the second one, rather than, having to play desperate in the second one. But then, they come back home and face the Avalanche Sunday night. And I mean, the Avalanche have traditionally been a pretty tough matchup for the Hawks. The speed of guys like McKinnon has given them issues, and Varlamov has occasionally stolen games as well. So we have definitely not seen the Hawks have some of their better efforts against the Avalanche, but at the same time, we've also seen some good games. So if you can get a split out of it, I don't know how much good that does the Hawks. I think they really need to take at least 3 points out of those 4, because that's really what's going to be able to separate them. Oh, hold on, my dog is going nuts all of a sudden. Hey, I mean, with the Avalanche, they are currently the team right ahead of the Hawks. The Hawks do have a game in hand against them, so we're 2 points behind them. So if we can win that Flyers game, we'll be tied with the Avalanche heading into that 2-game series. And, if you can get 3 out of the 4, you vault over them, and that's going to make a big difference, because then you head into the matchup against the Coyotes, who currently hold the final playoff spot. And that game is on Tuesday night. And obviously we're very familiar with, a lot of the Coyotes. They are riding a pretty good hot streak, although we did beat the crap out of them a couple of weeks back in one of the Hawks' better efforts of the season. We knocked Kemper out of the game, and but he's been playing strong, so it's going to be a pretty interesting battle.
Is that game in Arizona or Chicago?
Oh yeah, sorry, no, it's in Arizona, so okay. It's kind of a funky schedule. We play it against Philadelphia at home, travel to Colorado Saturday, come back to Chicago on Sunday, then travel back out to Arizona on Tuesday. So,
and of course, it goes without saying that the Blackhawks will have a home crowd advantage in Arizona because they always have a lot of fans here.
Yeah, well, not only do they always have a lot of fans in Arizona, just in general, but it only gets exacerbated this time of year with spring training still going on.
Yep.
So you got a lot of Cubs and White Sox fans already down there. So yeah, that's definitely going to hopefully propel the Hawks a little bit, give them a little bit of energy. There will definitely be a large contingent of fans down there for that. So
yeah, and we've been said this before, big series, but this like Wednesday when we do this again, and a week from Wednesday or a week from today, we will know if the Blackhawks are going to make the playoffs or not. Basically,
yeah, because after those three games, the two against Colorado and then the one against Arizona, they've only got one remaining game over their final 5 that are against anybody that they're in competition with, and they got one game left against Dallas.
Yeah, so, I guess a better way to say it is we don't know if they'll make it, but we'll know for sure if they're out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're facing the team that's directly ahead of you twice, and then the team that holds the final playoff spot, just ahead of them. So, yeah, it's a gigantic stretch of games, and the Hawks need to continue to play the way that they have been outside of those 2 periods in Vancouver. So yeah, and the third, get rid of the first 2 periods in Vancouver and the one bad period in Toronto, and stick more with what we've seen from the other 4 or 5 games in this recent stretch.
Yeah, but they did earn themselves a chance, so I guess that's all you can ask for.
You keep trying to bury them, and they keep saying, "Nope, we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stick with it," and showing the character anyway.
Yep, but this is it. This is the big stretch that they've got to. They don't have any margin for error in these games. They've got to win them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, they got to take. Boy, you'd almost want to say 5 out of the 6, or I shouldn't even say 6. There's 8 points available, so you probably need at least 6, and comfortably, you probably want 7 if you really want to have a good shot, because they got the couple of teams ahead of them, and they're playing the teams that are important. So gotta steal these points. You can't let those other teams, they're 3-point, they're swing games, so too important to lose at this point.
Yep. So I guess we will be back next week to see if the Blackhawks still have life. And if they don't, well, we can pivot toward the season ahead, the off season ahead and the draft and stuff. But hopefully we'll still be able to talk about playoff chances ahead. But this week will tell. So on that note, as always, I'm STH85 on Twitter, and Michael.
MJ_Ernst.
Yep, and you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Just look up the Emergency Goalies. You got any comments about the podcast? You can send me or Michael a message on Twitter. You can also rate and review it on iTunes. Just let us know you're listening. We always like it when people say they're listening to the podcast. So until next week, we will talk to you then, and hopefully the Blackhawks will take care of some business.